I wish for a world that views disability, mental or physical, not as a hindrance, but as unique attributes that can be seen as powerful assets if given the right opportunities. Oliver Sacks. Welcome to Long Haul Hope, a podcast for long haulers, their loved ones, and those who care about them. My name's Joe Grabowski. I'm a husband, a father, a pastor, and a tech geek. I've had lifelong struggles with depression, anxiety, and ADHD, and I've also most recently been diagnosed with long-haul COVID after suffering from shortness of breath, severe fatigue, and brain fog for over 2 years now. Long Haul Hope is not a medical podcast, but a voice of validation, empathy, support, and solidarity. Most of all, it's my desire that this podcast will be a voice of hope in the midst of the darkness of a diagnosis we do not yet fully understand. Each week, I'll share personal updates, positive news developments, advocacy, helpful resources, which I hope will be of value to you in your journey with long COVID. If you felt misunderstood, unheard, devalued, or even been made to feel as though you're a hypochondriac, you've come to the right place. You are not alone. Together we are stronger. There is hope. Hey friends, welcome back to the Long Haul Hope podcast. Today I wanted to share a couple of news stories with you. I've been collecting news articles and resources and information, and the intent is to hopefully more frequently share some information and some encouraging updates about long COVID, about what we know, what research is finding out, and some possible treatments or other sparks of hope that we may find. And so today I want to focus on two articles that are both based out of the same report. There was this report back in January 2022 from Brookings Metro that took a look at the impact of long COVID on the labor market. Now, as you may well know, long COVID is a condition of diagnosed by exclusion. You have to exclude every single other possible explanation in order to be diagnosed. So in other words, there's a decent chance there are people out there who have long COVID who simply have not been diagnosed. And I'll take that one step further. In this article, which I'll share in the links today, which is called New Data Shows Long COVID is Keeping as Many as 4 Million People Out of Work by Katie Bach, published Wednesday, August 24th, 2022 on brookings.edu. This article talks about that report back from January, and it's really comprehensive in the data that it shares. It brings it all together about the contemporary science that estimates that between 10 to 30% of people who have COVID, however mild or maybe even asymptomatic, will go on to develop some form of long COVID. So I think I said at a previous episode, even if you estimate low and say about 100 million Americans had COVID of one form or another, and you go by the lowball estimate of 10% of that, you're talking about at least 10 million Americans today that have long COVID. And I think that is fair to say that number is ridiculously low. I think that number is considerably higher. And according to this research, they're estimating that this report said that 1.6 million full-time equivalent workers could be out of work due to long COVID. That's a direct quote, which potentially accounts for 15% of the labor shortage. Now, this has been some updated information, and it's saying now that around 16 million working-age Americans likely have long COVID today. That's a pretty sobering statistic. The Census Bureau would put that about 8% of working-age Americans. And of those Americans, it's suggesting that at least of the people who've had COVID, at least 24% have experienced long COVID. And according to this other estimate from the CDC, about 70% of Americans have contracted COVID-19. So again, use the math. So it goes on further. It says, in quote, if 24.1% of them have had long COVID, then 34 million working age Americans have had, at some point, had long COVID. Now, right there kind of grabbed me, because this is saying from this Minneapolis Fed study that 50% of respondents with those longer range symptoms, quote, had recovered from long COVID. This is, according to this, approximately 50% of people who had long COVID have recovered. And that, to me, it was the first time I've really heard something. I've heard incidental stories here and there about people saying they did have long COVID, but they believe that they have fully recovered. They've regained their level of quality of life and activity that they did before they were sick. But otherwise, I was not really able to find much statistics that said, really, are people getting better? What's the statistics saying? What are the chances that we will recover at some point? Well, this is saying that about 50% of the respondents had recovered from long COVID. And now by saying recovered, I don't know what that means, but I find that encouraging. I know that there are quite a number of you out there with long COVID and also with ME/CFS and other post-viral conditions that are either unable to work full-time at the capacity with which you were able to work before or are currently unable to work at all. And that's concerning, and that is one of those things I keep bringing up, that yes, though the COVID pandemic may feel like it's a fading memory in a lot of respects, the national health crisis of long COVID is really just beginning. The impact it's going to have on our nation, especially left unchecked, is going to be substantial if there's not some help. So from this Fed study, it says that 25.9% of people with long COVID had their work impacted. 20% from this United Kingdom's Trade Union Congress are not working at all, and an additional 16% are working reduced hours. And another study published in The Lancet found that 22% of people with long COVID were not able to work due to ill health, and other 45% had to reduce hours worked. And those numbers vary, but it's not saying, well, only a small handful of people with long COVID aren't able to continue working full time. I consider myself one of the lucky ones. Again, I spoke about that before because I am still able to work full time, albeit not without my challenges. But I am working on accommodations and getting the support that I need. But for those of you who've had your work and your livelihood impacted by this can be very distressing. So this is saying, going on all these statistics, I want to just kind of scroll down and leave the article reading to you if you're interested. But it breaks it down. So if you're working with an employer and you're wanting to get them to understand long COVID before the potential impact, this may be a good article to hand off to them, because as I've shared with my employer, I may be the first person with long COVID here, but I most certainly will not be the last. This is going to substantially impact the labor market, but with recognition and support from the government, from the healthcare side of things, and from employers, the impact of long COVID upon the economy and upon people's productivity and ability to work and to perform can be somewhat mitigated, and I believe maybe quite a bit, but if it's taken seriously. So I'm scrolling down this article, and it's talking about this 2015 Institute of Medicine report stating that 835,000 to 2.5 million people in the U.S. have ME/CFS, and many people long COVID meet that criteria. But that's disheartening. That's a piece to think, like, right here. There's been this report that is now 7 years old that found that there's a substantial segment of society that is also being, their ability to work, their ability to live life has been compromised by debilitating fatigue and other problems. And we know that ME/CFS has been long ignored or minimized by the medical world, by the government, and by employers. So this is why I'm glad that the ME Action Network has really taken the long COVID community under their wings, and we're working together to really advocate some change on the federal and on the state level to get the people the help and the support and the validation that they need, to make sure that doctors and providers have information that will be meaningful and informative and helpful, not harmful, and that people who have barriers to healthcare and health disparities will find those obstacles removed and the paths made clear to get the diagnosis and the help that they need. But I'm speaking directly about employment today because, especially for people who are younger, I'm in my 50s, and it's taking a hit on me. It's taking a toll on me because the thought of not being able to perform at my previous level or at all is very scary to me. I've done a lot of thinking about this, and some days I feel great. I feel like, I could do just about anything. But more than not, these days, I feel very limited in what I'm able to do for one symptom or another. So this article, again, I'm going to share it in the link below. It's very comprehensive all about long COVID, all about the numbers, all about the potential impact that it holds. And it touches upon employer accommodations that employers could keep in mind and be aware of, and resources for them, and the law around them. Because long COVID, President Biden declared last year that long COVID was a disability that was protected under the Americans with Disability Act, which makes workers eligible for workplace accommodations. But without knowledge, without resources, without information, then that declaration is limited to a point. So I'm gonna share that shortly, and then but I want to skip to the next article because it poses this. The findings of it is that as many as 4 million Americans currently may be out of the workforce, diagnosed or undiagnosed, because of long COVID. And I've been hearing that a lot, that this is an employees market. You're seeing it reflected in the rapid rise in wages and employee benefits and perks that are being thrown out there. And yet I'm hearing people say, why aren't people coming to work? Why aren't people wanting to work? And there's a presumption that people are sitting at home and they're just wanting to collect unemployment and they're not wanting to work, or they're just lazy. I believe there's a bunch of different reasons for this, but this article, this report, really shone a light on it, that an estimated 2 to 4 million Americans may be out of the workforce right now because of long COVID. And they may not even know why they haven't been able to return to work, other than they just don't feel like they used to. And that number is only going to increase. Now, the secondary article I read it on MSN.com, but it's originally from KSNW Wichita. It is published August 21st. It's called Long COVID. With as many as 4 million out of work, how can they come back? And this is a great article because, again, it's comprehensive about what long COVID is, what employers should know, covers all these things. It summarizes that previous report I spoke of with much of the similar findings, but then it takes it further. It uses doctors' words, it uses patients' words. And so I'm gonna just want to highlight a couple things here that really jumped out at me that this article says. So let's see, Katie Bach, right, whose report, the other one I think talked about, talks about the policy implications of long COVID in the workforce. And there's a direct quote in here from her. It says, it's like front page news, like when we see a 0.5 percentage drop in labor force participation. And she says that I'm talking about something that's a lot higher than that. Every company needs to be cognizant of this. She's estimating that lost wages approach $200 billion a year right now from the people who are out of the workforce right now because of long COVID. Again, never mind where it's going. It goes on. The article goes on to say that if employers want these people to come back, they're going to have to be flexible about accommodations. They're going to have to be more understanding that it's not merely a preference, but it's a need. and it addresses this concern that, it's going to be costly or it's going to adversely affect employee morale. But yet this Job Accommodation Network survey of thousands of employers shows that the cost of making accommodations is vastly outweighed by the benefits, saying that the average cost is well under $500. And matter of fact, according to this survey, 2 months, this is a quote from the article, 2 months after making a workplace accommodation, 90% of employers reported retaining the employee. 68% of reported workers were more productive, and 57% of reported staff took fewer days off. And this is from a 2021 survey about long COVID and accommodations in general. That's substantial. If you think about it right now, if you've lost your job because you experienced the effects of long COVID, the fatigue, the brain fog, the tachycardia, shortness of breath, or any other reason it hindered your ability to work, and you went to your employer and you tried to find some different way to do your job, and they were just not willing to bend with you, and you ended up having to leave your job or you got let go, ask yourself, if they had understood about long COVID, and especially understanding that it qualifies as a disability under the ADA, and they conveyed that they valued you, and they sought to understand how they could support you so that you could still perform the essential functions of your job, or perhaps there was some other role in the organization or the company where you work, would you still be working today? Would you be, maybe not full-time, but would you be working part-time? But would you be making some money? Would you be feeling some sense of quality of life? It's a good question to ask, but it's a good conversation to be having on a national level. It also describes us as the walking wounded. Those of us who are impacted by long COVID physically, who experience post-exertional malaise, and who push past it so that we can show that we can get the job done, so that we don't feel like we're going to risk losing a job, but then we pay the price of a heavy crash. This person quoted in this article refers to us as the walking wounded. And some days that's what I feel like. Talking about accommodations, the article mentions long COVID podcast host Jackie Baxter, who said the best accommodation she heard of was an office that created a nap space, and talking about the importance of pacing instead of going boom, 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 get things done. Imagine if your employer accommodated you by letting you restructure your schedule, do what you can, and go take a rest without fear of reprisal or getting in trouble or getting let go, and then being able to go on to the next task. By pacing, as you know, we may not be able to do everything that we used to do, but we can consistently do more than we would do if we push ourselves, because it's when we push ourselves, it's that we pay this horrible price in this crash and potentially impact our health for the long run adversely. So the article just continues on about, really, if employers look at it as this $200 billion cost in lost wages alone, that should be more than enough incentive for employers and for the government to do what they can to understand and to accommodate and to support people in working, whether they work changed hours, whether they're able to work from home, whether they're able to kind of work on their own energy schedule. But many of us feel like we've just been left in the dust as life has rushed on back to normal. We know from our own experience that life with long COVID feels anything but normal. But if there's any hope to be found in this, I want to bring it back to those main points that article says. Some research shows that there's 50% of people have recover from long COVID. Now, for those of us 2.5 years dealing with the symptoms, that may feel like a fading hope, but it's still a hope. It's still a hope, because if one person can do it, then more people can do it, and maybe it's possible that we can do it. So my hope is that in the coming weeks, as I have some of these other news stories, I'm going to be looking for articles that are informative, but also offer some light and some hope and some positivity into our lives, into our journey, into our collective struggles, because we're in this together, and together we're stronger. And the more informed we are, the more we're going to be able to advocate for ourselves and collectively advocate for others. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share, or leave a rating and a review. And I'd love to hear from you. You can contact me at joe@longhaulhope.com and follow Long Haul Hope on Facebook and on Twitter. And as always, get plenty of rest, be compassionate with yourself, and keep choosing hope. I'll chat with you again soon.